Hello. So I'm re-recording this video because the sound was messed up the first time I did it, and there were lots of other technical issues too, which is very Gemini. Gemini is a sign that is about working through things, and we're gonna start by looking at this music video for this band Salem, and I'll explain the three Indian signs, also known as, well, primarily known as the Nakshatras. No one really calls them Indian signs, actually, except for me. But they are actually the 27 moon signs that come out of Vedic Astrology or Jyotish from India. So, the three Nakshatras that cover Gemini is the second half of Mrigasharsha, which you can see here. Then you have all of Ardra, and then you have 3/4 of the sign Punarvasu. And these tell the story of Gemini. Gemini is the moving air sign. It is the first air sign we have in sequence on the zodiac. It's the third sign of the zodiac. It is a dual or changing sign, meaning its modality is changing back to a cardinal sign, which is Cancer. And I'll cover that in more detail in a different video, the modalities as they're called. And it's the air element, so it involves thought, it involves a balancing of yin and yang energy, and it happens in a bit of a chaotic way, because in the center of Gemini, in the center of all of the air signs, we have a Rahu-ruled sign, and Rahu is it's the north node of the moon, which this music video happens to have right on the cusp of Taurus and Gemini, just in Gemini, in the center of Mrigasharsha. And so Rahu rules Ardra. It also rules the other two air sign nakshatras that are in the center. Like, it rules this one in the middle of Libra called Swati, and then it rules the one in the middle of Aquarius called Shatabhishak. But today we're looking at Ardra, which is at the center of Gemini, because this is symbolized by a storm. This music video has these two band members. They're chasing after a storm. They're tornado chasers in Louisiana, I believe. In rural Louisiana, they're in a pickup truck chasing a storm. That's pretty much the whole music video. And Ardra is about chaos, it's about drama, it's about conflict, it's about working through ideas. It's not chaos for chaos's sake. It's just, it has a very harsh type of approach to trying to work through things. So right in the center of Gemini, we have this tornado-like storm that is trying to work through the yin and yang energy imbalances to get to something more peaceful and balanced, which we finally get to in the last 10 degrees of Gemini in this nakshatra called Punarvasu. Now, if you followed this series and watched the previous video, then you've already heard something about Mrigasharsha, which starts out Gemini. It also ends the last 6 2/3 degrees of Taurus. So Mrigasharsha is symbolized by a deer in the forest going after Soma, the pleasant, enlightening manifestation of the divine. And in a more practical sense, Mrigasharsha is representing a desire to collect things, a desire to accumulate things from the material world, and creature comforts, luxuries, and it represents curiosity, it represents an innocent seeking, all of these sorts of things. So it's sort of bearing the reward of all of the hard work of Taurus, of all of the hard work of let's say, Aries, that then turned into the sensual accumulation and appreciation of Taurus. And then as we go into Gemini, we're experiencing Well, we're starting out with something to work with. We're starting out with the things that have been gained through the material journey, and then that's what we're getting out of the last part of Mrigasharsha. It's the moving air sign Gemini is, and it begins with the benefit of the fixed earth sign, which is all of these accumulated beautiful things found in the forest of life experience, as symbolized by the deer of Mrigasharsha in the woods accumulating. And so for this music video, and then these ideas all get worked through, they get balanced out in Ardra in a pretty chaotic, stormy-like way. And then in Punarvasu, there's actually a sense of peace, a calm after the storm. This music video doesn't get to the calm after the storm on the astrology chart, although it is represented to some degree in the music video. But, and I'll have a link in the description for the video if you'd like to see it. And the thumbnail actually comes from that. That's why I'm starting with this one. So Rahu is at the very beginning of Gemini. So this is expressing, Rahu is the chaotic external world that's taking us to the deeper truth of life through chaotic worldly means. And that is very much like a tornado or hurricane type of energy. But this Rahu is happening in the very first degree of Gemini, halfway through Mrigasharsha, in the air element of Mrigasharsha. So it's very air and very air element related. And this is, we also have the part of fortune in conjunction, showing there's good fortune with this music video in its representation of the chaos of the materialism, really. I mean, this is a band that achieved great success in the underground, and the main guy was even invited by Kanye to produce on his album Yeezus, and that's where Yeezus got a lot of its sound from, was from this very popular, I guess it was a type of goth, dark synth music that was popular in the early 2010s, late 2000s. And so it was a very chaotic sound that this band had to begin with, and as well. But basically, all of that success that they accumulated didn't bring happiness or peace to their lives. In fact, it was quite the opposite, where they got just deeper into drugs and just kind of left alone music for 8 years, and then came back with this song and this album, which was more about, I guess this is kind of just a sad song, but the album, from what I understand, it has a lot of themes of like the dark side of fame, I guess you could say, which is also what Kanye was expressing on his album Yeezus as well, really. So Mrigasharsha, when it has a chaotic element in it, like Rahu, is expressing the chaotic element of the material universe, and that is symbolic in this music video of the tornado that the band members are they're intoxicated by, and they want to get close to it. They're tornado chasers in the video, and it's a real video. It's pretty crazy. But then they're running away from the tornado, and they're driving away from it in a hurricane type situation. Well, it's a tornado, but it's also a thunderstorm at times. And so that leads into Ardra, which is the ascendant. And so this music video is known for the storm that they're running away from. And it has, the success of this video is in showing the good fortune that comes when you recognize the chaos of the materialism, really, and where it doesn't take you where you finally want to get to. And yet, going through that hero's journey or that disillusionment process through focusing on materialism will have its lesson to teach you. And this music video is successful in communicating that aspect of this song and this band's journey. So that's the one we're starting out with, is Salem's music video for Starfall. Then we're looking at this band, Modest Mouse, and their album, The Lonesome Crowded West, which was released in 1997. Here we have the moon in Punarvasu, and yeah, the ascendant is right across from it in Purva Ashada and Sagittarius with Venus and Mars. So I'm re-recording all of these, so I'm going to try to just get to the essence of these charts to make this video a bit shorter than my first take as well. But yeah, we're covering Gemini today, so I'm going to stay focused on that. This album, what's really interesting is this album is called The Lonesome Crowded West. And we're going to see a theme in a lot of disillusionment of the material world and a need for a new perspective, or a disillusionment in some kind of perspective, and a need for a deeper, more cosmic perspective, which Punarvasu brings. And so this moon in Punarvasu on this album's chart for Modest Mouse, The Lonesome Crowded West, this moon has the mind of the album, which is the moon, has a cosmic perspective. Punarvasu is a nakshatra that's ruled by the goddess Aditi, that represents space. It represents the cosmic perspective itself. And there's no actual planets. If you look above the moon, the nearest planet is the sun, which is almost 120 degrees away. And then the nearest planet below the moon is Saturn, which is 90 degrees away. It's square to it. So this moon is very isolated because these other three bodies here, Rahu, Lilith, and the part of fortune, all three of them are actually projected points or mathematical points that aren't actual planets. Basically. So this moon is actually very isolated. This is a certain type of pattern in a chart that would let you know that if this was a person's chart, they would be someone that would be prone to loneliness. And there's a lot of interesting things going on here because the moon is in Punarvasu, which is a cosmic perspective, but it's also in the 7th house of relationship. So this album is representing a desire for human connection, for romantic connection, but it feels very lonely. And this album is about a disillusioned perspective on the wealth of America or capitalism and the isolating feeling of being in a mall or being in a society where there's so much wealth and there's so much abundance in different ways, and yet people could feel so isolated in apartments, in houses, in trailers, just wherever they live. And this album has this perspective of a very cosmic view. It's very kind of Pink Floyd-like in its energy because it's looking at reality from kind of a trippy perspective. But it's also very emo. It's very emotional. It's very longing for human connection. And the moon being in the 7th house here with that cosmic perspective, it's pretty much the perfect description of it. And I guess the ascendant, I'll just say it's a very fiery energy with Mars at the very end of Mula and this ascendant it's all happening in Sagittarius. So there's a lot of fiery energy on this album as well. It's like a very energetic rock album, and you have the part of fortune there in Leo as well. So I'll just leave this one at that and move on to more fiery energy, really. Kurt Cobain. And I have a few charts like this in here. So yeah, Kurt Cobain, he has Uranus and Pluto on his ascendant at the end of Leo, so very fiery energy for Kurt Cobain. Explosive energy with Uranus in Leo, which is a fire sign. But what we're looking at here is he has the moon sign at the very first degree of Punarvasu. So it's the same kind of thing where he has this perspective. It's the same thing as the first chart I looked at with Salem, I suppose. No, it's a little different, but it's in the same ballpark. So he's bringing in this new thing. There was the death to glam rock that came from Nirvana that Kurt Cobain brought to the world. Kurt Cobain, he just popularized a new form of rock music that became world famous and took away the more glam 80s sound that was more superficial, that was more materialistic, that was more worldly, I suppose. And Kurt Cobain's music was more personal and more cosmic as well. He had lyrics in certain songs, like the song All Apologies. He had the lyric, all in all is all we are, which is a very Buddhist or Eastern or Taoist or Hindu type of expression to put into a Western hard rock song that you hear on the radio. And so this is represented by Jupiter also being in Punarvasu in Cancer, which is the more gentle, nurturing, feminine side of Kurt Cobain, and then the more yang energy side of him here in the center of Gemini at the very first part of Punarvasu, right on the cusp of it, where his mind in this lifetime that he lived as Kurt Cobain was very much focused on discovering something cosmic. And nirvana, in fact, is a word that comes either from Buddhism or Hinduism. I forget where, if it's in the Vedas or if it came later. But because actually Buddhism and Hinduism both stem originally from the Vedas in the philosophy of it. But regardless, this moon at the beginning of Punarvasu, it's this cosmic perspective again that is disrupting and bringing something new to the world. And then he has all of this fiery energy, explosive energy with Uranus and Pluto, very transformative, wild energy planets at the very end of Leo, the fixed fire sign. So that combination, as well as the Jupiter there at the end of Punarvasu, which shows a lot more wisdom as well, from this cosmic perspective that he brought to the world through his music, because this is all happening on the top part of the chart that is what the world would see of him, and it's also what he would benefit from because this moon is in the 11th house. So I'll leave it at that. Let's see, then we go to we'll come back to the gurus. Star Wars? I didn't look at Star Wars the first time I recorded this video, but Episode 5, The Empire Strikes Back. Let's look at it briefly. So, the moon at the end of Ardra, I think this is worth looking at briefly just to show how Ardra, it's very chaotic, it's yin and yang, working things out. It's coming after the disillusionment, as we're seeing from Mrigasharsha, not being satisfying. Once you collect all the things you're curious about, you're not fully satisfied, so then there's sort of this conflict that needs to be worked through. Well, where do I go next? And so there's a lot of feminine energy, interestingly, with this placement in Star Wars Episode 5, The Empire Strikes Back. And because there's the moon and Venus are both very feminine energy, this is happening in the 9th house. And so 9th house is about spirituality, it's about good luck. So this was a very successful movie, so we could look at it that way, that the thing that's very obvious to me about the moon is that there's a conflict at play. The mind of the film is focused on an imbalance, a conflict, and this is very exciting for a movie. If we look at the rest of the chart, we would see how the movie would make sense in a bigger picture. For instance, we have the Sun and Mercury in the 8th house, which is the heart, and the movie communicating something from a deeper place about the mysteries of energy itself. This is the movie that went deeper into the mythology of the Force, and where we first met Yoda. And so that Sun and Mercury there, it's this, in the 8th house, is going to be very mysterious. And then in Kritika, there's going to be a lot of energy and power, or that's going to be at play here. And that Venus at the beginning of Ardra shows a gentleness that's happening in this movie, and there is, a romantic element to it that's happening, so that could be part of it. It's also just the movie is very beautiful to look at. It had even better special effects and colors than the first one, with things like Cloud City and the place where Yoda lived. There's just... I suppose that just has to do with the beauty of the film, and then the moon in Ardra just has to do with the concept that conflict, a movie that has its moon in Ardra, it has its mind in the realm of conflict and trying to resolve it, and the moon is at the end of Ardra, where it's very effective at resolving it. So, I think I'll just leave it at that, and I'll also just mention that Jupiter and Mars here in Leo, and Rahu, it's going to show the success of the film in the 11th house, where good fortune can happen and the gains of a movie can happen, as well as it's the passion and confidence that the film is going into, the filmmakers had going into it, because the first movie was so successful. And the movie has that kind of energy of confidence in itself. Where the first Star Wars, was a bit more experimental, a bit more of an indie film, actually. And yeah, so right after that, we could look at The Matrix. So Matrix also has the moon at the end of Ardra, so there's a conflict there that wants to be resolved. It has an awareness in this sign of Ardra, which is about conflict, but it's at the very end of Ardra, where it's getting figured out. Like, the midheaven of the movie is in the middle of Ardra, so there's a hero's journey happening where the thing that's most apparent about the film, which is what the midheaven has to do with, is the conflict itself. And then the moon, which represents the mind of the film, is that it knows the best way to resolve this conflict in a way that's enjoyable as a film. And yeah, let's just keep it moving. Let's see. Yeah, I have a few other musicians here. Spirited Away. Here's another film that, let's see where the moon is. So here we have a stellium in Gemini. So the moon here is in Punarvasu, because this film has a much more cosmic perspective. As the title of the film implies, Spirited Away, there's a very spiritual element and cosmic element to this film. It exists in a dream world, or an astral plane, or an in-between life and death world. All of these things are kind of true for it. And you have this, stellium is a collection of multiple planets, and so we have Jupiter, Mercury, and the north node of the moon, Rahu, all in Ardra. So there's this story being told here, and we have planets very close by as well in Rohini, in Taurus. So I'll just tell this whole story of all these planets real quickly, because stelliums are always so interesting to go through. Because we get an arc of signs that tells us the hero's journey of part of the zodiac itself, we could say. So we have Saturn and Venus together in Taurus, so there's this conflict between those two, because Saturn is very harsh, but Venus is very happy in Taurus, because that's the feminine sensuality sign, and Venus is the ruler of that sign. Saturn, at the beginning of it, shows a dissatisfaction with this sort of sensuality, and yet it's still there and being appreciated, but there's a dissatisfaction. So even though there's nothing in Mrigasharsha here, it's these two combined in Rohini, Saturn and Venus in Rohini, has a very similar energy to what I was expressing at the beginning of this video in Mrigasharsha for the band Salem in their music video, Starfall. So that dissatisfaction but still enjoyment of beauty and color leads into Ardra, which is where the conflict begins. And so here we have a similar contrast where Jupiter is expressing the beauty of conflict. So this film, the conflict and the problems of this film actually are very beautiful, because it's beautifully animated and directed by Miyazaki. And then we have Rahu, the north node of the moon, which is the ruler of Ardra, just fully embracing the chaos. So this is, you could say, an exalted Rahu. In fact, according to some ancient Vedic texts, there is some debate on this among different writers from history, but some will say that Rahu is exalted in Scorpio and Aquarius, I believe, if I'm getting that right. Maybe. Yeah, I think that's right. And then Rahu is also sometimes exalted in Gemini and Taurus, interestingly. Gemini makes a lot of sense to me because we have this Rahu-ruled Ardra. Ardra is actually ruled by Rahu. It's also the deity of Ardra is Shiva, the destroyer. Rahu has a very destructive element to it. So this film is basically in very good harmony with the forces of chaos and destruction for filmmaking narrative purposes. And that because we have Jupiter here, where there's a lot of beauty that's discovered through the chaos of this film. with the animation and the creativity of the story. And then we have Mercury at the end of Ardra, which means it's communicating all of this very well. And then we have the moon on top of the midheaven at the start of Punarvasu. So now we have what the film is really known for, which is the spiritual perspective of the astral plane, of the afterlife, of karma, perhaps, consequences for your actions. And this moon is where the mind of the film is in this higher perspective beyond the chaos, and it's leading to an even higher perspective into the heart of the film, where the sun is just past Punarvasu and Pushya, which is a sign of a guru, a teacher, someone who has become enlightened, and it's also the sign of the mother that's very nurturing. And there is this element of the film where it's this little girl that's on a hero's journey, a lot like I guess Alice in Wonderland, and she is looking for guidance, and there's different women or witches or older women in the film that are influencing her, that she's having to decide whether or not to trust. So eventually the film is taking to her this place where she can trust her own heart, her own inner wisdom. And so this is a very deep, a very beautiful film, one of the most beloved animated films of all time. So, yeah. Let's see. Oh, I keep going back to Drake. Maybe it's time to go to Drake, but we have two more films. Citizen Kane and Casablanca are both have moons in Gemini, and I'll go through these quickly. But Citizen Kane, we have that dissatisfaction with the material world. We're coming out of Mrigasharsha. There's no placements in there, but we have this conflict in Ardra where everything's trying to get worked through. The chaos is trying to get worked through, and there's a discomfort with the cosmic perspective and the guru nurturing perspective in this film, because Pluto and Chiron, it's going to make this feel very uncomfortable. And so this film actually, it revels in expressing the problems of somebody who becomes isolated and very powerful but totally alone. Again, this moon doesn't have too many neighbors to its left or right. The house just before it is it has Jupiter, the very first degree, but this moon and this moon has the outer planet of Pluto, which is very cold and also explosive and unpredictable, and it has Chiron, which is an asteroid that is the wounded healer, is what it represents. And so there's a woundedness around this cosmic perspective and a call for healing around the isolating effects of power and success if it isolates you, and if all the material things just don't make you happy. And this film has this there's this famous rosebud element to the film, where if you haven't seen it, I won't spoil what that is referring to, but the main character of the film, who's based on someone in real life, William Randolph Hearst, the newspaper titan mogul of that time period, whose morals and ethics were very he was very ruthless in how he would compete with people. He did things that are now illegal to do, that would be considered monopolistic, and just he abused the political system to get what he wanted, and had laws passed to make even marijuana illegal just because his competitors were trying to print their newspapers on hemp. And so he made marijuana illegal and launched a whole campaign in Hollywood against it, just so he could make more money and have more control of the newspaper industry. So after, Orson Welles released this film, William Randolph Hearst basically had him blacklisted from Hollywood. And for the next 20 years of Orson Welles and his young career, he never had control of his films. The studios would always take control of his films and finish editing them however they wanted, or even redirect the films and hire another director if they didn't like Orson Welles' vision which is crazy to try to like imagine like Mozart or Leonardo da Vinci having someone else, finish their paintings or compositions because the person in control thought it wasn't good enough. And so this film it has a lot of that energy that you could say followed Orson Welles around like a tornado attached to it, and the suffering around the cosmic perspective in Punarvasu we could see, and the healing that comes from it too, but a painful process because that's the essence of Chiron, and also Pushya in Cancer there in those placements. So yes, this moon in Ardra, again, just for a film period, the moon in Ardra is going to have a conflict that's going to give a lot of grist for the mill, a lot of fuel for the fire of an exciting film. And this film actually has a stellium of like 7 planets here in Aries, which is very significant, but I won't go into that to keep this video short. But you could see, but the fire and air element go really well together. So that's another thing just worth mentioning, is that a lot of these planets are going to be sextile. If we look at the line here, that bright yellow-green line, it's a sextile relationship, which is very supportive between the moon in Gemini and all of these planets in Aries, because that's the geometrical relationship that air and fire signs can have that are very supportive to each other. So, and then finally, or maybe we have 2 more films, actually. Maybe I'll just do films in this video. I don't know. I'll finish up the films and then I'll finish with some music. But let's see. Yeah, so Casablanca. Oh yeah, well we did start with music as well, of course. And we still have the gurus to look at too. Let's see. This moon for Casablanca, it's in Punarvasu with Lilith. So this is another way of representing a cosmic perspective that has discomfort involved, because Lilith is the dark node of the moon. The moon is the mind. Lilith is this obsessive or withdrawal quality, this kind of neurotic, sometimes destructive quality, because it needs something to balance it, and the moon by itself isn't enough. Jupiter gives this hopeful element in Cancer, but this film, Casablanca, it's all about, taking place during World War II. It's taking place in this interesting sort of waiting room bar area. It exemplifies this archetype of a bar as being an in-between space where people can just go and some kind of wisdom or things can appear, or ignorance can get worse. Ideas are exchanged. Coffee shops have this energy too. Bars have this energy in a different way because people are drinking. And this movie, it has this kind of zoomed out perspective, cosmic perspective on conflict, on World War II, but it has the pain of it with Lilith there, and the challenge of the relationship that's happening in this film between Humphrey Bogart and the female protagonist. So I haven't seen this film in a while, so I won't say any more about it, but those were the things that came to me, this interesting insight that came to me about the cosmic element of a place like a bar, which you ordinarily wouldn't think of. But if you think about like the TV show Cheers, which was very popular, or the bar in Star Trek, The Next Generation, where Whoopi Goldberg's character talks to Patrick Stewart's character, and other things will kind of get worked out. It's sort of outside of the war zone, outside of the playing field, outside of the captain's chair area, or whatever you call that. So similarly in Casablanca, this bar, it's a place where people are discussing ideas more freely to try to work through things among the chaos that's happening in the world at the time. And then the relationship, I suppose, acts as a symbol of that too. Okay, yeah, I have Adam Sandler. And yeah, so for comedians, the moon in Ardra is going to be very effective. In fact, a lot of comedians are going to have placements in Ardra because Ardra has a blunt force energy to it. comedy has a mixture of truth and kind of misleading information that makes it funny. It's giving you, it sort of stimulates the mind to think differently without being direct. And that's a very Ardra energy. Ardra can also be very blunt and harsh because it hasn't worked through things completely. And comedians, usually, they're not philosopher kings or sages, or enlightened people, but they're very stimulating, and they're the people who are willing to say the thing other people aren't going to say, even if it's wrong sometimes, but it stimulates the continuing conversation, but it can have this tornado-like effect. And if someone has their moon in Ardra, their mentality and approach to life can be quite harsh, and they can be kind of hard people to get along with a lot of the time. But Adam Sandler has a lot of other things that give him balance. I mean, mainly this stellium of 6 different things in Leo, which would give him a lot of confidence and certainty and success in how to communicate, because his Mercury is there, and it's in the 11th house, which is going to have a lot of good fortune attached. So he also has this gentleness from his Jupiter being exalted in Cancer. So he has a balance of yin and yang energies in a way where this moon, even though it's an Ardra, his mind won't be overly harsh. There's things to balance that out in his chart. But it makes him a very effective comedic actor and comedian, basically. And there's other things about him too, because he's a great dramatic actor, but in the at least 2 films I've seen where he plays that kind of role. There's another movie in here somewhere. Okay, so this film, Everything, Everywhere, All at Once. We have the moon in the center of Ardra and the center of Gemini, and this is a very chaotic movie. And we also have Lilith here at the beginning of Gemini and Mrigasharsha. This movie has a villain that's very dissatisfied with having access to all the material possibilities just imaginable, basically. And there's a disillusionment with that, which is the dark side of Mrigasharsha, which the placement of Lilith is going to bring out and emphasize, a dissatisfaction with the material accumulation of things. And then the moon has this conflict that's very exciting for a film and very imaginative, which we're going to get from other placements in the chart as well, like what's happening in Pisces and Aquarius in the chart. But yeah, I'll leave it at that. I just wanted to show this as another more recent example of Moon and Ardra making a film very exciting, as well as this Lilith placement in Mrigasharsha, emphasizing the shadow side of that nakshatra, which itself is not a bad sign, or a disillusioned sign, actually, even. Let's see. And then Drake, I think he might have the same thing. He certainly does. That's so wild. Look at that. He has his moon and Lilith in the exact same spot as the film, Everything, Everywhere, All at Once, except just a few degrees further, and he has a double whammy of Lilith and Chiron in Mrigasharsha, so that's an extra element of dissatisfaction with material things, and perhaps this Lilith being at an even higher degree of Mrigasharsha, at about 5 degrees of Gemini, shows that he's even more obsessive about collecting things and being very wealthy. So this is a sign of great wealth, which is interesting because often in Vedic astrology, things that don't look good in an astrological sense can indicate great material wealth, but it doesn't bring happiness, it doesn't bring spiritual growth. And so he has this thing with his Chiron, which is the woundedness, being triggered by his material success. And this kind of reminds me of the Notorious B.I.G. line, more money, more problems. And Drake's entire career has this kind of theme throughout it of him complaining about people trying to take him down and girls betraying him and just wanting him for his money and friends just wanting to be his friends for his money and him not being able to be himself and feel safe. He's communicating all these things that are very vulnerable and come from a place of being wounded. Meanwhile, he has this confidence because look at this, his ascendant is in Maga, which is the sign of the king, and the sign of great confidence, but also obsession to stay in power, which he certainly has. And then the moon at the very end of Ardra shows how his mind is focused on conflict, and it shows how he's really good at communicating from a place of being focused on conflict. And a lot of his songs, I'm just thinking of one song comes to mind where the chorus is, enemies, I've got a lot of enemies, they're trying to take away his energy, and something like that, right? It's the first song, one of his albums. And so there's this kind of paranoia as well, which you could see with Lilith and the moon being so close together, and with the moon in Ardra, which is focused on conflict. However, the moon's at the end of Ardra, so a lot of that is also just acting and a show and finding a way to take his shadow side and create something very creative out of it. He's created this archetype, this character of Drake, which might not match who he is entirely, but this does show he's very competitive. It does show he's trying to solve problems mentally, because Ardra at the center of Gemini and here at the end of Ardra, that's trying to get to the bottom of this conflict of Ardra, this tornado like yin yang imbalance trying to work itself out and come to a conclusion, which in Drake's chart he doesn't have any placements that come after this for quite a while until you get to Maga. And so he has a lot of confidence, but he doesn't have a mental understanding necessarily of the deeper realities of life. That wouldn't come very easily to him. He would be much more comfortable communicating about conflict itself and the way that he overcomes conflict while being in the middle of it. A lot like those tornado chasers that we started this video with. So, I think Lil Peep, he's one more chart. We looked at Kurt Cobain already. Lil Peep also has a prominent Lilith and moon here in the same part of the chart. It's not a close conjunction, but there's other stuff going on here where his Lilith is in conjunction with his ascendant, so there is a great deal of woundedness and obsessiveness at the end of Cancer in the sign of Ashlesha, we'll cover in the next video, which in Lil Peep's chart has to do with his own kind of just being a sex symbol and being known to be very, appealing and to people in general, to women especially, and his music had a lot of sadness around relationship, and Ashlesha would have to do with his own clinging nature to relationship and sadness, a lot like Drake, except unlike Drake, this is more in an emotion. This is a more authentic emotional kind of conflict that he deals with or dealt with before he died. And then the fact that we have his moon in his 12th house, he wrote so many songs about death, and he was known to be kind of a gothic emo rapper. He was one of the innovators of that genre before he died, and that Drake was influenced by even. And actually, Billy Corgan said that if Kurt Cobain had been alive now, then he would have probably been a lot like Lil Peep was, because, similar background, and, rap music is just the popular music these days, so it makes sense. But this moon in the 12th house shows the mind focused on transformation, focused on death. But then this moon in Punarvasu shows he's not focused on conflict, he's focused on the cosmic. So he has this really cosmic perspective about transformation, about death, about life in general, actually. But his ascendant with that Lilith would be the really challenging thing in his chart. And he also, like Drake, has a placement in Maga. He has Mars in Maga at the beginning of Leo, which makes him very energetic and confident. And then there's a lot more going on in Lil Peep's chart, but I'll leave it at that. And finally, we'll wrap up with these two spiritual teachers. So Ramana Maharshi, which I have an entire video on in my channel, so if you want to see more on him, you could go there. But just to recap briefly, K2, which we haven't seen any K2 placements in Gemini yet, which we've seen a lot of Rahu around here, which is interesting because Rahu rules Ardra, and it's exalted in Gemini according to at least some ancient Vedic texts. And K2 is more spiritual than Rahu. It's more directly, it's about going within. If it's not being used spiritually in a chart, then it becomes more anxiety producing, basically, and especially having a K2 next to the moon, that's either going to produce great anxiety for a person or great spiritual wisdom for a person, because their mind is going to go deep within. And depending on what else is going on in their chart, that could go in different directions. But this is also on top of Ramana Maharshi's midheaven, and this means Ramana Maharshi is most well known for how his mind went deep within, which is exactly true. And this is in the 10th house. It's right on top of the midheaven. So Ramana Maharshi was somebody who is one of the most famous spiritual teachers of this practice of self-inquiry, of going within, of asking yourself who you are really, and allowing this question to open you up to the cosmic truth of who you are that can't be put into words. And this is all happening in the cosmic sign of Punarvasu at the end of Gemini, which is the sign of questioning and overcoming the material world, and then the conflict of how does all these different things make sense in the world, Ardra. And finally in Punarvasu, we're in the cosmos, we're in space itself, ruled by the goddess Aditi of space itself. So yeah, this is the spacious cosmic perspective of the mind of a sage, Ramana Maharshi, looking within with Ketu and Moon, a parent to the world. And then his ascendant is in Chitra, which means he is also just, he's aware of the beauty of all of this too. It's not depressing, it's not boring, it's actually the most beautiful thing imaginable, to go deep within and discover your true nature that can't be put into words. And finally, I guess we're going to finish off with another very different spiritual teacher or philosopher or just person. He was kind of known to be the anti-spiritual teacher. I'm noticing his local birth time was 1:11 and 8 seconds. That's kind of interesting. But just another little synchronicity, perhaps. But U.G. Krishnamurti, different from the more famous Jiddu Krishnamurti, who he did know and was actually influenced by early on. So he has a stellium in this part of the chart. He has all his planets are over here. That's really wild. He's only got Mars somewhere else as far as the main planets go. And yeah, so I'll go through this pretty quickly. He has he has a very happy Venus in Rohini, except it's in the 12th house of loss. So just like I did with that other chart that was like this, Spirited Away, I believe, I'll just go through all of the planets of the stellium one by one in order, because it gives this beautiful story about the zodiac that will wrap up this video well. So this part of the zodiac. So Rohini is sensuality, it's beauty, and Taurus is sensuality, groundedness, beauty, the fixed earth sign. Venus is the ruler of Taurus, so this shows he has an appreciation for beauty and the world, except he appreciates it most by letting go of it. And he was known to just let go of everything, to just let go of his money, let go of his possessions, let go of his relationships, let go of his status. I think this is why Jiddu Krishnamurti appealed to him so much, because Jiddu Krishnamurti was somebody who didn't want to live by anyone else's rules, and he was sort of chosen by the Theosophical Society to become a world teacher from a young age, and he gave that up. And a lot like that, U.G. Krishnamurti was constantly giving up his position of authority, constantly saying that he didn't know anything and nobody else did either, and there's no such thing as enlightenment and it's all nonsense. And we'll get to those parts of it as we move on, but he did have a very sensual beauty to him. And I did an interview with one of his devotees or someone who was friends with him actually for the last 12 or 15 years of his life, and she told me that he was also perceived as very feminine a lot of the times, and she said that he would constantly be mistaken for being female, and he identified as male, but he had a very dual energy to him of yin and yang. And so this feminine energy of Rohini was a part of his character. And then Mrigasharsha, this is with K2, so he was introspective, going within, also just letting go of things, because this K2 is at the very end of the 12th house So that's just the final degree of letting go, going within. A lot like Ramana Maharshi, we had a prominent K2 in his chart as well. K2 is thought to be the sign of spirituality and going within, as well as OCD, obsessiveness, and anxiety, which you could see that if Yuji Krishnamurti hadn't found spirituality, his personality was very harsh, and it might have caused him more mental problems if he hadn't been so spiritual. But that's kind of a bit of a, it's a what if that doesn't make sense, because look at all these planets. There's no what if here. This is a very specific placement of all these things that's very interesting and defines him completely, really. Well, not completely, but you know what I mean. It paints a picture that approximates something. And Jupiter is at the end of Mrigasharsha, so again, there's an enjoyment of all the different things of the world. That it reminds me of this friend of mine. She told me that she was a dancer, and she one time she invited Yuji to one of her dance shows, and at the end of it, he said something like, what was the point of that? That was stupid or something. Like, he was insulting to her, but he was just being honest that he just didn't like it. Or he might have just said, I don't get this at all. This is just nonsense to me. But I think he said it in a harsher way than that, which she appreciated about him, actually, because she didn't feel, I don't know. It's people who are and were drawn to Yuji appreciated him for his bluntness. And this we're going to see in the Pluto and Ardra, an explosive bluntness in Ardra. But then she told me that, like a week or month later, he said something very complimentary about the dancing. So he could go either way. It's very, he could appreciate the beauty of things, but he always wanted something simpler, something more basic. And he didn't, so he had a complex dual relationship to things that he expressed that were part of his teaching, really. And so that explosive nature in Ardra, we have that with Pluto. So all of that chaotic force of that comes from bluntness, but that transformational force, because Pluto is is a transformational planet as well, and it's very powerful. So there's a powerful transformational force in Yuji that he was known for here in his first house with that Pluto and Ardra. And also an appreciation of beauty, even though he could also be blunt about his opinions with it, with that Jupiter in the very end of Mrigasharsha. And maybe an appreciation about spirituality and different spiritual teachings as well, even though he was also very harsh in his criticism of that. And then finally, we have really the meat of his chart, which is the ascendant, moon, and sun, all in Punarvasu. This is an incredible placement, because this triple conjunction in Punarvasu shows this very cosmic perspective. It shows why people were so drawn to Yuji. His ascendant is right on the cusp of Gemini and Cancer. It doesn't even really matter which one, because it's kind of both. And the moon is in Cancer. The sun is at the end of Gemini. And this is just showing his mind, his heart, his presence. All of it was incredibly cosmic, incredibly deep. He didn't even have to say anything for people to get this impression from him. And then his great fortune was being a teacher who communicated. He wrote books, or he spoke and people transcribed them to books. And this is the part of fortune and Mercury together, showing good fortune in communication, as well as with spirituality and imagination with Neptune. And then finally, the Saturn in Ashlesha shows the harshness that he could actually bring to his close relationships to people, like I was describing with that one follower and friend of his. And he also divorced both of his wives. I think he was married twice. And his relationships just had, I don't think any partner could really feel comfortable with Yuji, because he had such a harshness that he lived with. As a personality, is because Saturn in Cancer is going to be a very uncomfortable placement. But this triple placement in Punarvasu, if you listen to 5 minutes of Yuji, you'll get to hear just one of the most cosmic perspectives ever, but in a very unconventional way, because he just denied everything. He denied that enlightenment is even possible, or that he's enlightened, or that he denied just that he even has a body, or he even knows what that means, or that he doesn't have a body. Just like whatever people would throw at him, he would deny, which is the traditional spiritual practice of In India, it's called neti neti, not this, not this. This is an approach or one description of the spiritual path of self-inquiry that Ramana Maharshi also was a proponent of, except Ramana's way was very different. It was a lot more gentle and nurturing. He didn't have any of this harshness near this section. So here you could see two very different teachers. In fact, they met once when you could look that up if you're curious, but there's a funny story about when they met and the way that Yuji remembered it and described it. So yes, that's the end of this video on Gemini. To wrap it up, I'll just say Gemini is the air sign, the first air sign, and we carried through this journey of trying to figure things out and coming to a cosmic place by the end of it. And if you liked this video, please click like, and I'll see you in the next video.